Wyoming Territory, 1879. The first snow had not yet come. But the air bit sharp as a blade when August Remington rode through the narrow ravine north of Bitter Creek. His horse, a chestnut gelding named Dust, stopped suddenly, ears twisting. August narrowed his eyes, scanning the thickets of sagebrush and rock. Then he saw the vultures circling. He dismounted, rifle in hand, boots crunching over frost-laced earth. The sun hung low in the west, casting long shadows over the canyon walls. She was lying curled on her side near a cluster of blood-dark stones, her dress torn and streaked with dried mud. Her face, bruised, swollen, one eye nearly shut. A gash ran from her temple down to her jaw. Wolves paced nearby, low to the ground, drawn by the scent of blood. August fired once into the air. The pack scattered. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Miss!" His voice cracked with urgency. "Can you hear me?" Her lips moved, barely. "Please. I got you," he whispered. "You'll never be alone again." She flinched when he touched her arm, but he moved slow, careful. She was half-conscious, her breath shallow. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her gently and cradling her against his chest. She was so light, too light. He laid her across Dust's saddle, tying her in place with his bedroll and spare rope, then walked beside the horse the whole way home, watching her every minute. August's cabin sat at the base of a ridge, about 4 miles off the main trail. He'd built it himself 6 years back, after too many years of drifting cattle trails and burying friends. It was simple: 1 room, a stone hearth, table, cot but clean, warm. He laid her on his cot, stoked the fire high, and boiled water. When he returned to her side, her eyes fluttered open. "Where?" "You're safe now," August said. "My name's August Remington. I found you out by the ravine. Can you tell me yours?" Her eyes were glassy, but she managed. "Tessa Hale." He nodded. "Tessa, that's a good name." She coughed, trying to sit up, but he gently pressed her back. "No, rest. You need time." I ran," she whispered, voice hoarse. They took everything. I do not even know how long I was out there." August didn't ask who they were. Not yet. He saw the haunted look in her eyes and knew it did not matter right now. What mattered was she was alive. He cleaned her wounds with a damp cloth, every touch slow and careful. She winced a few times but never pulled away. When he brought her a cup of warm broth, she sipped it, hands trembling. That night, she slept in his cot while he sat near the fire, rifle across his knees. The wind howled outside, but the fire stayed strong, and he never closed his eyes. The next morning, she was still weak, but the swelling had gone down some. She could sit up. August brought her a blanket and sat across from her. "Do you remember what happened?" She nodded slowly. "There were 3 men. I was traveling west with my brother. He owed money. They came at night, took the horses, beat him. I tried to fight them off. They hit me hard. I do not know where my brother is now." August's jaw tightened. "You were left for dead. I thought I was going to die." "You are not going to," he said. "Not while I am here." She looked at him, really looked. His face was rugged, sun-worn, with a faint scar along his chin. His eyes were steady, calm like deep water. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He hesitated, then said simply, "Because no one should be left like that, and because I know what it means to lose everything." Tessa's eyes softened. "Thank you." He nodded once. "You just rest. I will take care of everything else." In the days that followed, August kept her fed, warm, and safe. He showed her how to use the rifle just in case. Tessa learned fast, though her ribs still ached and her bruises painted her skin. One afternoon, She stood outside the cabin, eyes on the horizon. August watched her from the porch. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. She turned to him. "No, I have not felt safe in so long. I forgot what it feels like." He nodded, quiet for a beat, then said, "You are safe here, for as long as you need." She smiled for the first time since he had found her. It was small, but it reached her eyes. That night, over stew and cornbread, she asked, "Did you ever have anyone?" He looked into the fire. "Once, a long time ago, she got sick. I could not save her." Tessa reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "I am sorry." He looked at her, her touch soft, her gaze steady. "I did not think I would care about anyone again," he said. "But then I found you." Her breath caught. "August, you do not have to say anything now," he added, voice low. "But just know, you are not alone anymore. Not ever again." Tessa's hand curled around his. She did not let go. The wind changed by early November. It no longer whispered through the trees, it rasped, dry and cold, carrying the scent of snow not yet fallen. August rose before dawn most mornings, splitting wood while Tessa watched from the doorway, her shawl tight around her shoulders. Her bruises had faded to yellow, the cut along her jaw healing with a fine, pale seam. She moved easier now, but still walked with care, favoring her right side. One morning, as frost clung to the eaves, she stood beside the stove, folding a worn flannel shirt of his she'd taken to wearing over her dress. Her hands paused at the collar. "August," she said, voice quiet but sure, "I'd like to help with the trapping lines." He looked up from loading the firebox. "They run long. Takes most the day." "I've walked farther than that," she said, not with pride but simple truth. He studied her a long moment. "All right, we start early." They left on foot, dust carrying the gear. The traps wound through a low pine grove east of the ridge, where foxes left narrow tracks and mink curled through the creek beds. Tessa kept pace, her breath clouding the air. She asked questions about bait, about how to read the ground, about which furs sold best come winter. August answered all of them, steady and patient, watching her movements. She didn't flinch at the first catch a rabbit, cleanly taken. She knelt and reset the snare with surprising grace. They made camp under a windswept cedar before the sun dipped too low. He struck a fire while she unpacked the bread and dried meat she'd wrapped in oilcloth. She handed him a slice. "You said you grew up in Kansas. What made you come this far west?" He chewed slowly, then swallowed. "Too many fences. I wanted sky." She nodded. "My mother used to say the land remembers the people who treat it kind." "She teach you how to track?" "She taught me how to find water in dry places. My father taught me the rest." August leaned back on his elbows, watching her face in the firelight. "You speak like someone who's been through more than most." "I have," she said plainly. "But I still believe people aren't born cruel. They just forget how to listen." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin. He opened it, revealing a folded scrap of paper. "Found this near where you were." She took it carefully. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. "It was torn from a ledger," she murmured. "My brother kept track of our route. This was the last town we passed through Rawlins." "Could be he made it there," August said. "If he did, someone might have seen him." Tessa stared into the flames. "If he's alive, he'll come looking. And if he doesn't?" She looked at him then. "Then I still have breath in me. I'll find a way forward." They sat in silence after that, the fire snapping between them. When they lay down, she curled beneath her own blanket, not far from his. The wind sighed through the trees. In the stillness, he heard her whisper something, too low to make out. By the time they returned to the cabin the next evening, a thin crust of snow dusted the porch. August brushed it off the step with one boot. Tessa opened the door and stepped inside, pausing just beyond the threshold. "This place," she said, glancing around, "feels more like home than anywhere I've known." He didn't answer right away. He hung his coat, then turned to her. "Home's not a place," he said. "It's who you're willing to stay for." She met his gaze, steady and quiet. "Then I think I've found it." Neither of them moved. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, the silence stretched soft between them, no tension, just something waiting. She stepped forward first, closing the distance. "I'm not afraid anymore." He reached for her hand, warm and calloused. "You never had to be." The morning came cold and silver gray. The sky hung low with clouds that hadn't yet let go of their snow. August sat at the table with a hunting knife in hand, smoothing the edge of a pine bough he'd carved from a branch near the creek. Across from him, Tessa stitched a patch into the shoulder of a wool shirt, her needle slipping through the fabric with practiced ease. "You always keep busy," he said without looking up. "I don't sit well," she replied, knotting her thread. "Idle hands make room for worry." August nodded, setting the bough aside. "I was thinking," he started, "about Rollins, about going." Tessa's hands stilled. "You think it's time? It's been near a month since I found you. You've healed strong. If your brother made it to town, he'd leave a trail someone could point to." She rested her needle and looked toward the window. "I've wondered if I'll know him when I see him, or if he'll even want to be found. Only one way to find out." They left the next morning before the frost had melted from the ground. August rode with his rifle slung behind him, Tessa seated behind, her arms wrapped around his middle. The road to Rollins was narrow and worn, bordered by dry shrubs and wind-carved rock. They passed no one until late afternoon, when a freight wagon creaked by, its driver nodding without slowing. Rollins sat low and wide in the basin, ringed with coal smoke and the faint rattle of rail lines. They arrived at dusk, the sun caught behind a ridge, casting the town in a pale orange glow. Tessa tightened her shawl as they dismounted. August tied dust outside the livery. "We'll start at Haver's. He keeps a ledger of travelers." Inside, the room smelled of tobacco and dust. Behind the counter, a man with a crooked back and ink-stained fingers peered over wire glasses. "Looking for someone?" he asked, not unkindly. Tessa stepped forward. "My brother. We were separated near Bitter Creek. His name's Elias Hale. He's tall, dark hair, a little stoop in his left shoulder." The man scratched his chin. "Had a boy through here about 3 weeks past. Matches what you said. Didn't stay long. Sold a horse, left on foot westward." "Alone?" August asked. "Far as I saw." Tessa's lips parted, but no sound came. August placed a hand on her back, grounding. They left the store and walked until the buildings thinned, open land stretching westward. Tessa stopped beside a dry fence line, her hands gripping the rough wood. "He didn't look for me." August didn't answer right away. "Maybe he thought you were gone. Maybe he couldn't face it." She turned toward him. "I thought I needed to find him to move on. But standing here, I feel further from him than I ever did. You don't owe him more than you've given. You lived. That's enough." She looked at him, her face changed, not broken, just older somehow, steadier. "What about you, August? What do you want from all this?" He hesitated, then said, "I want to build something that doesn't vanish when winter comes." She took a step closer. "With me, if you'll have it." Tessa reached for his hand this time without hesitation and threaded her fingers with his. "I will." That night, they stayed in a room above the blacksmith's shop. where the walls held in the heat and the floorboards creaked with every shift of wind. August lay on the cot with his arm around her, her head tucked beneath his chin. "I used to dream of a place where I wasn't afraid to love someone," she whispered. He kissed the crown of her head. "You're there now." Outside, the snow finally began to fall. Quiet, slow, and clean. They returned to the cabin just ahead of the deeper snows. By the time the last ridge fell behind them, the road had vanished under a thin crust that crunched beneath Dust's hooves. Tessa walked the last stretch beside August, her jaw set, her eyes tracking the wind-caught shapes in the whitened trees. Neither of them spoke much that day, but the quiet wasn't heavy. It had settled into something known, something easy. Inside, the hearth still held warmth from the coals August had banked before they left. Tessa knelt to coax the fire higher, her breath curling in front of her. He watched her from the door, his gloves stiff with frost, then hung them by the stove and shrugged off his coat. She glanced over her shoulder. "Someone's been here," she said. He stepped closer. She pointed at the floor near the table, 3 prints, booted, not his. Small stones had been knocked from the sill. The water bucket had been moved. August crouched, touched the edge of one print. "Didn't take anything. Looking for something then," she said. "Or someone." The fire cracked behind them. Tessa stood, brushing off her skirt. "We didn't tell anyone where we were going." "No," he said, rising slow. "But word moves strange out here. Mule drivers, post riders. Someone might have seen us ride out." Tessa crossed to the window, her palm resting on the frame. "If it's one of the men from the ravine—" "It's not," August said, quiet but firm. "They wouldn't knock around a cabin and leave without trouble." She didn't argue. Instead, she turned and began unwrapping the parcels they'd brought from Rollins flour, beans, a jar of molasses. Her hands moved steady, but her shoulders were drawn tight. That night, the wind came down hard from the north, rattling the shutters and throwing snow against the roof in long gusts. August sat by the fire, oiling the long-barreled rifle. Tessa sat across from him, rubbing wax into the seams of her boots. "I used to be afraid of winter," she said, not looking up. "Where we lived, it meant hunger. Cold that settled in your bones and didn't let go. You're not there anymore." "No," she said, setting the boot aside. "But knowing a place is behind you doesn't stop it from following." He leaned forward, setting the rifle aside. "Then we make something stronger here. Something winter can't touch." She met his eyes, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "You talk like you've done that before." "I've tried," he said. "Didn't hold." "Why not?" "Because I didn't let anyone close enough to help me keep it." Tessa reached for his hand, calloused fingers threading with his. "You don't have to carry it all alone." Her touch was warm, her grip firm. He held on. The days shortened fast after that. Tessa began charting the hours by the light in the cabin, the slant of sun across the floorboards, the stretch of shadow over the table. She kept the ledgers now, started a second journal with careful lines that marked each day's weather, the small changes in the trees, the sound of the creek under ice. One morning, she stepped outside and saw August by the barn, his breath clouding around him. He had a handful of fence posts slung over one shoulder, a hammer tucked through his belt. She crossed the yard, her boots sinking into the snow. "You building something?" He nodded toward the slope near the south edge of the clearing. "Thinking of fencing off a stretch. For a few goats come spring." "Goats? Easier than cattle. Don't need as much room. We could trade the milk, maybe the kids." Tessa tilted her head. "We?" He looked at her, then not startled, just steady. "If you still mean to stay." She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her shawl, lifting the hem of her skirt. "I'm not looking back," she said finally. But if I stay, I want to be part of it. Not just in the cabin, but in the shape of things. He shifted the posts to his other shoulder. Then we build it together. She reached for one of the posts. Start with this one? He handed it to her without a word, and side by side, they crossed the yard into the snow. The first kid was born in early May, just as the creek thawed fully and the willow branches began to green. Tessa had risen early that morning, drawn by the soft, strained bleating from the lean-to. She found the little creature nestled close to its mother, still slick with afterbirth, legs folded awkward under its trembling body. She eased close, voice low and steady, and the goat did not shy from her. By the time August stepped into the yard, the kid was cleaned and nursing. He stood watching her from the fence line, arms folded across his vest, the sun just brushing over his shoulder. She turned toward him, a smear of straw on her skirt, and smiled without needing words. That night, she sat on the porch steps with her knees drawn close, watching the last light fade through the trees. He joined her carrying 2 mugs of chicory boiled dark and bitter, the way she'd taken to making it. She took hers, their hands brushing in the pass, and leaned into his side. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He sipped, eyes on the horizon. "I used to think about leaving, always somewhere else to go. But now..." She waited. He didn't finish. "But now," she prompted, "I want to stay still. With you." They didn't speak for a while after that, just listened to the night sounds, crickets in the brush, the shifting steps of the goats settling in. When she finally stood, she left her mug untouched on the step and held out her hand. He took it. That summer, they built a second structure smaller, with a pitched roof and a stone floor that stayed cool even in the heat. It was meant for curing hides and storing tools, but Tessa kept a corner for the herbs she gathered along the creek beds: yarrow, horehound, and wild mint. She lined them in neat bundles along the rafters, their smell sweet and earthy. August watched her work one afternoon, arms coated in dust from splitting kindling. "You ever think about teaching someone all that?" She looked over her shoulder. "You offering to learn? I figure if I'm building a life with you, I ought to understand what keeps you steady." "You already do," she said. "But I'll show you anyway." The first letter arrived in late July, brought by a stage driver who'd heard there was a woman living out past the ridge. Tessa took the envelope with a steady hand, the writing on the front familiar but hesitant. She read it alone beneath the cottonwood, lips pressed to a firm line. When she returned to the cabin, she held the paper out to August. "He's in Idaho Territory," she said. "Says he's sorry. Says he thought I died and couldn't bear to come back." August didn't speak. "I wrote him back," she added. "Told him I'm safe. Told him I'm not the girl he left. But I'm not angry." "You mean to see him?" "No. I've made peace with it. That life, that version of me, it's done." He nodded, understanding what she didn't say. That fall, the fence line extended another 100 feet, and Tessa painted the trim of the cabin a soft ochre, the pigment ground from stones she collected along the southern ridge. She wore a band of wool around her waist now, dyed from lichen and bark, her fingers always busy with something useful. One evening, she set 2 plates on the table, stew thick with barley, stewed apples, a heel of bread each. August sat across from her, his hands rough and clean. "I've been thinking," she said, looking at the flicker of the lantern between them, "about marrying you." He set down his spoon, slow and steady. "That's so?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. "It's not that I need a paper or a preacher, but I want to call this what it is. I want your name, and I want to give you mine." He reached across the table, took her hand in his. "Then let's do it proper." They wed in late September, beneath the cottonwood, with nothing but the creek for witness and the wind in the grass. August wore his best shirt, and Tessa wore a dress she'd saved from her mother's trunk, the hem mended twice but still whole. He carved 2 plain bands from a piece of antler, and she passed hers to him with a hand that didn't shake. When he kissed her, she leaned into it like she'd belonged there all her life. Years passed. The goats multiplied. So did the rows of beans, the stacked jars of preserves, the lengths of dyed cloth folded into cedar-lined trunks. Tessa's journals filled 3 ledgers, her scrawl tighter now, neater. August built a 2nd bedroom off the cabin when she began to show. Their son came during a snowstorm, born red-faced and wailing, his mother's hands steady through the pain. They named him Elias, not for the brother she'd lost, but for the part of her that had survived. They raised him slow and sure, teaching him the language of weather and wood smoke, of listening before speaking, of working with his hands. He grew with the seasons, tall like his father, curious like his mother. One evening, years on, they sat on the porch while the boy slept inside, his breath easy through the open window. Tessa leaned into August's side, her hair streaked with silver now, her eyes just as sharp. "You ever miss the road?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not once." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Me neither." The night spread wide before them, the stars clear and quiet above the trees. The land, once wild and uncertain, had taken their shape and held it. Everything they'd built stood firm, and they stayed there, not just through the years, but through the life they made with hands joined, heart steady, and the world finally at peace around them.